Well, hello, everybody. I'm Captain Jeff Monroe, Director of Education and Standards for the International Association of Maritime and Port Executives. And I'd like to welcome you to our ongoing series of interviews with senior port and industry managers, to talk a little bit about their lives and a little bit about what they do as a series of guidance, for young managers coming up to see what other folks have done. And we've had a great series of really senior good people. And I'm really excited today because we have Dale Murray with us. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer. Dale is one of our distinguished Maritime Port Executive faculty members. He teaches both the inland program as well as the coastal program. And it's been great to have him aboard. He is a former senior executive with Watco, and he'll tell us a little bit about what he did with them. But what's really kind of cool is the fact that he's a brigadier general in the Maryland Army National Guard. So instead of everybody, groveling to me, I get to grovel to him. So, which I think is pretty good. So, Dale, welcome. It's great to have you aboard with us today, and we're very interested in hearing a little bit about your history. So, tell us a little bit about what you did for Watco, and a little bit about your career path, and some of the things that you found interesting in the track that have taken you to where you are today.
Sure. Well, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate the invitation to take part in Port Perspectives today. And to everybody who might be listening, just want to say, wish everybody happy holidays going forward. So I got into the port business in a very interesting way in 2006 when I was leaving the active duty Army. It turns out I couldn't find a whole lot of people looking for my to market my skills for as an armored cavalry officer. So I ended up working for a company called Kinder Morgan and Kinder Morgan Terminals. Kinder Morgan is a Fortune 500 company. Um, and I started working at the Kinder Morgan terminal at the port of Memphis and progressed with them. I finished as a director of operations with Kinder Morgan Terminals. And in 2016, myself and several of the terminals I was working with were bought by Watco, and that's how I started working with Watco in 2016. And worked several years as an assistant vice president for operations. And the last few years, I worked as a director of asset management, where I tried to make sure we were making good long-term plans for our long-term port assets. So that's how I got to where I'm at. Due to my obligations with the Army, I stopped working with Watco back in August, um, and just too many irons in the fire. So, going to focus on the Army for a little while now.
Sounds good. And you've had an interesting series of challenges with that back and forth overseas. I know we've had to work around your schedule and everything. And you just did completed a course with the Coast Guard in Baltimore, Maryland. We're aboard the nuclear ship Savannah, and that was kind of an interesting experience, I would think, for you.
It was, and I really enjoyed talking with the Coast Guard Sentinels, as I've learned they're called, as well as some of the civilians who work for the Coast Guard. Really interesting for me as they have a very specific perspective on port operations, and it was good to talk back and forth about the let's say the business aspects of port operations and kind of the cargo throughput that makes supply chains work. So it was really enjoyable course for me just because I was able to get a very interesting perspective from the Coast Guard.
And you've had a number of, obviously, there's a number of challenges with developing the assets for Watco and before them Kinder Morgan and stuff like that. What are some of the biggest issues that you had to deal with on the inland river system?
So quite a few. I would say the biggest issue is on the inland river system is you're dealing with ports who are just moving smaller volumes than coastal ports. Because of that, you're buying multi-million-dollar equipment that should be in place for at some ports up to 30 or 40 years. Um, but they're so expensive that you have to take a really long-term perspective on the return of that investment to actually make the investment. which Kinder Morgan's a publicly traded company, which long-term investments always always were difficult unless you had a really good business case to keep the get the investment you needed, just because the return was going to take so long to achieve. Uh, Watco, because it's a privately held company, was much more pragmatic in thinking long term about investing for the right equipment at the right place for the right business need.
Mhm. And Watco started off as a very small regional railroad and really expanded quite a bit. And of course, they bought a big facility down in Houston. And I remember the first time I ran into Watco personnel. These were folks that had graduated from Texas Maritime and were now working at the Watco facility and trying to figure out the language of the railroad, as a bunch of maritime guys.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Watco is a really good company. What I really liked about Watco is the caliber of the people were just a little bit higher. Wasn't that they were smarter or better, but everybody was focused on satisfying the customer, and that is Watco's number one priority. It's customer first. Watco grew through its customer base, and that was and still is Watco's philosophy. We'll grow with our customers, and where our customers' supply chains go, that's where our business will go. And that's how Watco went from being a small railroad company into being in the port business.
And I think that you find that in many cases it's been kind of interesting challenges. I suspect that with your work with the Army National Guard, that you've been dealing with a lot of cargo moves and everything. Like, how does the Army decide? And of course, what a lot of people don't recognize is that first of all, the Army's got more ships than the Navy does, or more vessels, I should say. But the other thing is that most of the Army commands have been very, very good with handling logistics. I mean, that seems to be their fundamental call there. And I remember I had spent some time training in Canadian military, their movement command up in Montreal, and they have their whole focus was moving everything across the board as quickly as possible. They had teams that went in and set up, all of the logistics and everything. Actually, they were one of the first responders down in Haiti prior to the current incidents when after the earthquake that they had down there, they had sent in their movement command right after the class. And it was kind of interesting about how they handled things and mobilized the Canadian National Defense Force. So I suspect that the Army does a lot of that similar as well.
Sure. So the Army works through U.S. Transportation Command, as does any service in the military, as it projects combat power to other parts of the world. Uh, in 2018, 2019, I had the opportunity to command an organization called the Black Sea Area Support Group, and worked really closely with Transcom and kind of the what's called the Joint Logistics Enterprise. Um, and it's really amazing the number of professionals who work to, as efficiently as possible, get Army cargo from the United States to whichever part of the world it's going to. There is a lot of, I'll call it science that goes into that, particularly the move from whatever installation the Army unit is coming from to a port to whichever port it's going to overseas, and then onward movement in whether that's in Asia, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, onward movement from that port to the ultimate destination for that unit. And it's really neat working with those professionals because they are very practiced at it, and there is a strong base of industry partners that work with U.S. Transportation Command to get the military moved all around the world.
Yeah, I found that the Army folks, as well as the Air Force folks, and of course Coast Guard, seem to acclimate well into the civilian port industry because they have the sense of how the logistics, the regulatory, and all the rest of it had to work. And as I used to tell these guys in the Air Force, who've taken the program. I says, recognize that you guys are into planes, but there are more planes in the ocean than there are ships in the sky. So, but they're very good at understanding the knack of how it pulls together and everything. When you were with Watco and of course now, still doing work with the Army and stuff, how do you use planning as a tool in all of that? Specifically looking at long-term strategic planning, because I think in a lot of cases we run into people who understand the basic concept of planning, but don't know how to use it as a management tool. And that has been something that we've been emphasizing, in our courses and stuff.
Sure, I would tell you the two most important aspects of planning are probably the aspects that a lot of folks skip over when developing plans. The first thing that I think strong strategic planners need is an awareness, and that's an awareness of what the current situation is. Um, and so, whatever equipment is available, whatever project you're trying to work on, truly understanding where your organization is before you start developing a plan. And the second aspect that I think gets overlooked quite a bit is understanding the problem. So everybody wants to develop a strategic plan, but before they start developing a strategic plan, they really need to be specific about what problem they're trying to solve. And I think a lot of people, because they're very, and the military has a problem with this as well. There are people who are so good at getting things done quickly, and they try to move out and start solving a problem very quickly before they have really defined the problem. And I think that's the role of senior leaders in the strategic planning process is to one, have that awareness of what the organization looks like and needs, and two, be very clear about what the problem is before we try to start solving the problem. And that I have found that to be a main obstacle both on the military side and in the port business.
Hmm. Well, you have a diversified number of people that you worked with, obviously at Watco, probably smaller teams, but then you deal with the Army. How do you manage to gel these teams together? How do you pull them together and so that they can do that, make that focus exactly as you say, looking at the problem, looking at what you have to work with.
Sure. I think uh, the key to pulling teams together is to build a common purpose. And what I mean by that is you have to be clear with the team about why what they're doing is important and continue to emphasize that through constant interaction. In a lot of cases, and particularly with port executives, you're talking about very busy people who have infinite number of other obligations and demands on their time. I think truly successful executives dedicate the time to touch base with the planning team that's working on the problem and solving the problem to make sure that one, that focus is still there, two, that there's any adjustments that need to be made, and whether that's major adjustments, minor adjustments, that can be with strategic planning, master planning. That can even be with Army tactical planning. It's the constant interaction and making sure that the leader, the one who's providing the guidance, um, has that touch point on a routine basis to get feedback from what the team is working on, but also provide focus back to the team and any adjustments that need to be made.
So we've done a number of projects for ports, and one of the questions that comes up on a regular basis is, how can we be the port of choice for military movements, for Transcom and whatever? What do you think are the keys to secret to success that we, as port professionals, need to keep in mind when working with the military or wanting to be that port of choice?
Sure. Just a quick disclaimer: I cannot speak for U.S. Transportation Command or Surface Deployment and Distribution Command.
Understood.
They have a very specific way that they select ports and contract with those ports. However, what I would suggest is, um, as the United States military contemplates deploying forces all across the world at whatever scale. Uh, U.S. Transportation Command is looking for a diverse portfolio of ports because there are any number of complications that can come up with the movement from what's called port to port, which is from the installation where the unit is and the equipment is to the port. So the more ports that are available to U.S. Transportation Command, uh, the more um, the more that they will have diversity in their supply chain or resilience in their supply chain. And what ports can do if they're interested in doing this is, um, they need good roll on roll off capability, but they also just need the flexibility and the space to handle military cargo movement, which will be by its very nature infrequent.
Mm.
But the ability to move both military vehicles and just containers and other cargo through a port in a relatively quick manner. That's what can attract the military to use in your port.
And obviously to let the military know what their assets are,
Right.
and to keep those assets well preserved. It's sort of remain. It makes the point of flexible and adaptable, right? Which I seem to
Right.
remember we teach in one of our courses somewhere along the
We
line,
do.
and say it constantly.
And I would tell you, speaking from an Army perspective, the Army believes moving equipment is training, because we are very fortunate to live in the country we live in. We don't necessarily expect to have to fight here in the United States, but we do expect to have to send our units to other parts of the world. And because of that, the Army is always experimenting. The 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, will ship a good bit of its equipment on barges down the Inland River system to get to Fort Johnson, Louisiana, which is a major training center. And they are doing that simply to practice the barge movement as opposed to rail movement. And so the Army, at least, is very interested in experimenting and practicing with various modes of transportation.
Yeah, and I one of the things that you had prepared for one of our slide decks was how, particularly on the inland side, the difference between how a shipper will decide using rail versus deciding using the barge. And you had brought us some excellent points with that.
Sure, I think a lot of that depends on volume, and that's going to be the main indicator. But the origin and destination of the inland river move also matters. If both the origin and destination are close to a port and you're shipping a large enough volume, you should really look at barge movement. If your origin and destination aren't really close to a river or to a port on a river, then rail may be preferable. And both rail and river, they're both subject to the whims of Mother Nature. And so as you think about these, you just have to include some resiliency, and really some, what I mean by resiliency is time understanding into your shipment moves.
Let me ask you a question. What have you found as an instructor and doing these seminars for us, both the inland and the coastal program? What have you found very interesting about the students that have been participating in these programs, and why senior managers should encourage their up and coming managers to get involved with these programs?
Sure. What I'll tell you, and I really appreciated this after I first took the program with you in Milwaukee in 2017, I think,
Mm,
maybe 2018. Um, when I started working with Kinder Morgan terminals at the port of Memphis, I was fortunate because that was a very busy port, and we handled a wide array of commodities through that port and had a wide array of customers. That forced me to think about a wide array of supply chains, and it took me a little while to understand that my port was a node in a supply chain, and I needed to make that node as efficient as possible. And whether that was to move in or move out on multiple modes of transportation, or just make the handling of that commodity as efficient as possible through the port. I could figure that out, but I needed going back to kind of building your awareness and understanding the problem, defining the problem. Uh, I needed to help my customers, the shippers, think through their supply chain. Uh, and while that sounds like a blinding flash of the obvious, a lot of shippers don't truly understand supply chains. Not because they're willfully ignorant or anything. It's just their business is manufacturing something or buying raw material, whatever it is, and shipping is kind of an afterthought. So as I've been had the opportunity to instruct several courses now, what I find interesting is the um, the light bulb that comes on when they realize that the supply chain, the origin and destination move, whether that's an international move or a domestic move, there are a lot of variables to it, and uh, it can always be more efficient. And efficiency and lower cost is important. Reliability is probably the most important aspect of that, and that's what I found most interesting. Just talking through that with folks.
Mhm. Well, I find I love your teaching style because you always draw people into the discussion. I tend to put a funnel in them and then just pour all the information in, until they explode. We often tell people it's like drinking out of a fire hose, but it's a very
Right.
comprehensive program. And of course, a lot of people don't realize that faculty goes through an extensive certification process. I mean, you had to take the program a couple times, and then, do a practice session and show us, your abilities to be able to present and everything, and also to deal with, answering questions when people throw things at you. So, and we've got some very good reviews on your programs, which we're very happy about. So, you have a lot of young people you deal with. I know you did at Watco, and you have a lot of young people that you're young and up and coming, captains, army captains, not real captains, but and and lieutenants and stuff. Um, what advice would you give to, first of all, young people in the civilian industry, who are coming up through the ranks and trying to figure out, what path they should take? And then maybe what advice would you give to young military professionals who are also looking to maybe achieve the same level of certification that you have?
Sure. I would tell you probably for both audiences, the best advice I can give is um, you are wasting neither time or energy by diving in and trying to spend time understanding how things work. Because the only way you're ever going to change or improve how things work is to truly understand uh, certain processes, why those processes are in place, and talk to the people who do those processes. And so all the energy that you have devote into understanding your operation, your organization, the system that you are part of, and spend some time and energy understanding the people who are outside your operation. And in the civilian world, that would be your customers. It could also be your customers' suppliers. It could also be your customers' customers. And so supply chains can be very complex, but trying to understand how it works is going to make you more under help you help your team better understand how that node in a supply chain fits into helping your customers. And on the military side, what I would say is you you're in a culture that encourages a lot of energy and a lot of understanding and moving at speed. And so for military professionals, but also for civilian professionals, you are never wasting your time taking a step back and making sure you understand the situation. And before you try to solve a problem, you need to make sure you understand what the problem actually is. So defining it, which sounds very boring, but we have a saying in the army: if you haven't realized at 2 a.m. that you've been solving the wrong problem all day long, then you you will not truly appreciate the need to define the problem before you start solving it.
Mm. Let me throw one more question at you. Is where do you see the industry going? As you know, we've had this ups and downs. Certainly, COVID was a big challenge for us. We had a lot of challenges on the logistics side, of course, everybody blamed the ports, but it wasn't just the ports issue. But where do you see our industry going in the next several years?
So I see the industry continuing to adapt and iterate to the new the changing world. Interestingly on the inland river system, that we've just gone through a couple of years of both severe storms, severe flooding, and severe droughts. But I think if you look back to the inland river system in the 70s and 80s, there were both severe storms, severe floods, and severe droughts. Um, and I would say that professionals in the industry now just need to figure out how to adapt with new technology because we have the ability to get more information than we ever have in our past, and that will just continue to get better as we progress into the future. I see the interconnectivity, whether it's domestic moves or international moves. I see the interconnectivity that ports bring as being critical. What I would say is for port professionals in general, uh, it's very important to understand how your port fits into multiple supply chains, um, and make your port as efficient as possible. And if you do that, I think you're going to have plenty of business for as far out in the future as you want to go. If port professionals kind of take a wait and see approach and wonder, why did this business leave? Why did that business leave? Then I think that particular port, is going to continue to struggle. And I say that to say I believe with an adaptive culture in port management professionals that our industry will continue to thrive and expand.
Well, we've got a lot of competition out there between ports. It's funny how everybody tries to eat each other's lunch, and I always tell everybody that is everything is all things are fair in love, war, and the port business. So such is the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I used to tell people, I guess I don't work for a railroad company anymore, so I can say this. If you work in an inland river port, your enemy is not the port nearby. Your enemy is the railroad. That's who's going to take business away from you, and you need to figure out how to take business away from the railroad.
We are competitors, and in many cases, we're also partners in the movement of cargo. So
Your port is much more attractive if you have rail connectivity.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, Dale, let me begin by thanking you for your service to our country. We've really, we appreciate all that our veterans do, but you're still serving, and we are grateful for that. And we're also grateful for the experience that you've brought to our seminars, and we're certainly grateful for, all the good work that you've done for us. We're always working around your schedule, which we understand, and I try to give you all the ones that I don't want to do. So someplace up north in the wintertime or something like that. But anyway, it's been a pleasure to have you aboard, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you today. And I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Hey, just for everybody who may be listening, hey, it's been an honor to talk with you. It is an honor for me to serve our nation and the United States Army. I am part of the 29th Infantry Division, and we're very proud of the history of our division. We're one of 5 U.S. Army divisions to assault Normandy on June 6, 1944. So if there are any 29ers out there listening, my parting thought for you is let's go. And to everybody else, I wish you a pleasant day and very happy holiday season.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that wraps up this session of Port Perspectives. And we'll look forward, I'm sure our students will look forward to seeing you in class. And we'll look forward to having you teach again. Safe travels, and be well, be safe, and keep your head down.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.